There are moments in history when silence gives birth to thunder. From the deep forests of the north, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania emerged, a power forged not by faith, but by fire. Its armies would face the Golden Horde and win. This is the story of the Battle of Blue Waters, where lightning struck the empire that once ruled half the world. In the 14th century, while Christian Europe pleaded for freedom from Mongol rule, the first true blow against the Golden Horde came not from the west, but from a pagan frontier that honored thunder instead of the cross. This is the story of the Battle of Blue Waters, when the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the last pagan power in Europe, shattered Mongol dominance and rewrote the balance of Eastern Europe. It was not the Rus who first struck the Golden Horde in Europe. That distinction belonged to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a fierce and rising power that still clung to its ancient gods. The confrontation took place at Sinivadi, or Blue Waters, a name that sounds serene but marks the site of a brutal conflict in southern Ukraine. When word of the victory reached Europe, astonishment spread through royal courts. The first to defeat the horde was not a Christian crusader, but a pagan duke and his thunder-worshipping warriors. Even the Teutonic Knights, usually too occupied with their own crusades to notice much else, later called the famous 1380 Battle of Kulikovo the Second Battle of Blue Waters. That title alone reveals how legendary the Lithuanian triumph had become. Records confirm that in 1362, Grand Duke Algirdas led his army against the Mongols and emerged victorious. Yet much about the encounter remains clouded in mystery. Ukrainian historians describe it as a pivotal clash that weakened Mongol control and reshaped the politics of Eastern Europe, but some scholars still question whether it took place at all. The uncertainty stems from poor medieval documentation. The first detailed accounts did not appear until the following century, and even then, they offered little more than a summary. A great battle. The Mongols defeated, Lithuania victorious. One of the earliest references comes from the Lithuanian chronicles, specifically the stories about Podolia, written nearly a century later. By the time modern historians in the 20th century began examining the evidence, they were forced to reconstruct the event from fragments of legend and rumor. Even so, the Battle of Blue Waters remains a turning point. Lithuania, the last openly pagan state in Europe, was far from the primitive image often painted by its enemies. During the late Middle Ages, it emerged as a formidable political and military force. While the rest of Europe quarreled over theology and heresy, Lithuania was building an empire. This empire did not grow from fertile plains or wealthy trade ports. It was carved from forests, rivers, and endurance. Unlike France or the Holy Roman Empire, Lithuania possessed no ancient Roman heritage, no Mediterranean coastlines, and no natural abundance of gold or grain. What it had instead was resilience and a refusal to surrender its spirit. Determination, strategic diplomacy, and relentless warfare became its foundation. Lacking the prestige of culture or economy, Lithuania turned to the power of the sword. Its armies faced the Mongols, the Teutonic Knights, and countless rivals, earning a reputation for unpredictability, a valuable weapon in medieval politics. The landscape itself shaped the nation's character. Endless forests so dense they swallowed travelers whole, bogs deep enough to consume horses, winters of frozen misery, and summers thick with mosquitoes. It was a harsh land that demanded strength, and it produced warriors hardened by survival. Amber and furs brought trade, but raiding brought wealth. Cattle thefts, slave raids, and looting expeditions turned necessity into strategy. These constant conflicts forged a society that lived and thrived by the sword. In time, that spirit transformed a remote frontier into one of the most feared military powers in medieval Europe. Yet geography was no ally. To the east lay the fractured Rus principalities, still under Mongol shadow. To the south, Poland's rising ambitions threatened to spill northward. And to the west and north stood the Teutonic and Livonian orders, crusading armies of professional soldiers, sanctioned by the Pope, armed with steel and divine conviction. Their mission was simple: to eradicate Europe's last pagans. For Lithuania, survival was not just political, it was existential. Every invasion was a crusade, every battle, a holy war waged for identity itself. Against all odds, the pagan duchy endured and expanded, playing enemies against each other with remarkable cunning. Prince Gediminas of Lithuania saw an opening, a weakness carved straight through the southern Rus principalities, particularly around Kyiv. Once the beating heart of Kievan Rus, it had become little more than a neglected outpost under Mongol supervision. After the devastating invasion of 1240, the city lay in ruins, its population scattered, its spirit crushed. For over a century, it served as a provincial client of the Golden Horde, sending tribute eastward year after year. The Golden Horde itself had started as a splinter of Genghis Khan's vast empire, something like a wildly successful successor state that managed to outlast the original Mongol dominion. Over time, its rulers settled into a new identity. They adopted Islam, traded their nomadic tents for palaces, and turned their gaze toward taxes, trade, and steady gold shipments from their vassal states. They came to be known as the Tatars, a name that sounded ancient and powerful, but described a people shaped by 2 centuries of ruling over the Rus. Against that backdrop, Gediminas made his move. Capturing the fortress of Ovruch, he swept through Zhytomyr and turned his attention to the grand prize, Kyiv itself. By 1324, Prince Stanislav, the city's Mongol-backed ruler, was in no position to resist. His army was small, his coffers nearly empty, and his defenses weak. The two forces met along the Irpin River. The Kyivan army fought bravely but was outnumbered and overwhelmed. By the end of the day, the Lithuanians stood victorious amid shattered shields and fleeing soldiers. For a moment, it must have felt like triumph. But Gediminas knew better than to celebrate too loudly. The Golden Horde was still a sleeping giant, and provoking it could mean ruin. Instead of planting his flag and inviting vengeance, Gediminas took what he could: loot, prestige, and influence, and withdrew before the Horde had time to respond. Kyiv didn't earn its independence that day. It merely changed its masters. The city became the heart of an uneasy experiment, a fragile political partnership between Lithuania and the Golden Horde. The Tatars still demanded tribute from the Rus lands, but for the first time in generations, Lithuanian envoys shared influence in southern politics. It was a strange form of dual rule, a diplomatic balancing act between steppe and forest, spear and scepter. And against all odds for a time, the system held. But history rarely allows balance to last. By April of 1362, the world around Lithuania was shifting again. The Teutonic Knights, those tireless crusaders of Europe, had reignited their wars in the north. Their armored host descended on Kaunas, burning, looting, and slaughtering in the name of faith. Grand Duke Algirdas, the shrewd and relentless son of Gediminas, rode south with his brother Kęstutis to defend the duchy. Yet they arrived too late. From the distant ridges, they watched the blackened towers of Kaunas collapse in smoke and ash, a humbling reminder of how fragile their frontier truly was. Algirdas understood what few leaders dared to admit. Lithuania could not endure by standing still. The duchy's borders were ringed by threats: Germans from the west, Tatars from the south, and rival Rus princes to the east. Survival demanded growth. Lithuania would have to expand, not out of ambition, but necessity. And that meant turning its eyes once again toward the fractured lands of the old Rus, where Mongol power had begun to crumble. By the early 1360s, the once mighty Golden Horde had begun to devour itself. The vast empire, which for over a century had ruled from the Black Sea to Siberia, was falling apart. In barely 20 years, more than 25 Khans claimed the throne of Sarai, only to be assassinated, poisoned, or betrayed. The Horde, once feared as the Iron Fist of the East, had splintered into a dozen warring factions. The Mongol warlords were too consumed with their own rivalries to notice the quiet rise of a northern power. While the horde bled itself dry, Algirdas moved with precision and patience. Lithuanian banners advanced eastward across the Rus frontier, city by city, each one falling with barely a fight. Many local nobles preferred new masters to the old. Chernihiv, Bryansk, Novgorod-Seversky, Starodub, Pereyaslav, each fell like dominoes into Lithuanian hands. With every victory, Algirdas tightened his grip, consolidating his conquests with garrisons and oaths of loyalty. Technically, these lands were still claimed by the Crimean Ulus, ruled by the powerful Tatar General Mamai. But Mamai's attention was fixed elsewhere, locked in a desperate struggle for dominance over the crumbling horde. He had neither time nor troops to challenge Lithuania's advance. Algirdas, sensing the moment, pressed on. His goal was not merely expansion, it was prestige. And there was no prize more symbolic than Kyiv, the ancient cradle of Rus civilization. Once the seat of princes and patriarchs, now a shadow of its former glory, Kyiv still carried immense spiritual weight. To seize it would not only break Mongol authority in the west, but proclaim Lithuania as heir to the legacy of the Rus. By the autumn of 1362, Algirdas' army marched along the Dnieper River. To the Turks, it was Yabgu, the ruler's land. To the Rus and Lithuanians, it was Sinivadi, blue waters. Most scholars believe the battlefield lay near the Sinuka River, a tributary of the southern Bug that meanders toward the Black Sea. Whoever controlled this region controlled the arteries of medieval trade, the passageways through which silver, salt, and slaves flowed between east and west. Yet, for all its importance, the battle itself remains shrouded in mystery. The Lithuanians were not a people of parchment and ink. Their chronicles were etched in memory, in legend, and in the scars of survivors. The most vivid account we possess came 2 centuries later from Maciej Strijkowski, a chronicler writing long after the battlefield had been swallowed by time. Still, across the centuries, the outlines of the story remain. Algirdas, called Alaris in some accounts, faced 3 Tatar brothers, Kutlabuga, Kachabay, and Demetrius. They ruled Podolia, a fertile land south of Kyiv, rich with rivers, grasslands, and trade routes. The brothers collected tribute for the Golden Horde, enforcing its will along the edge of the steppe. But Podolia was more than a frontier. It was the threshold between 2 worlds, the nomad and the plowman, the east and the west. Whoever commanded it could choke or unleash the flow of commerce to the Black Sea. The names of the Tatar lords themselves reveal a land in transition. Podolia was not purely Mongol nor entirely Slavic, but something in between, a mosaic of peoples and loyalties where tribute and betrayal existed side by side. Algirdas led an army estimated at 20 to 25,000 men, disciplined warriors drawn from across Lithuania's growing domain, hardened by decades of war. Facing them stood roughly 20,000 Tatar soldiers, fierce and mobile, but lacking their elite heavy cavalry. Mamai had recalled them for his own campaign on the lower Volga. By early December, the 2 armies met across the frozen banks of a river that would forever be remembered as Blue Waters. The winter air cut like a blade. Frost clung to armor and horsehair. Smoke from hundreds of campfires twisted into the gray morning sky. Both sides knew that this clash would decide the fate of the southern steppes, and perhaps the balance of power in all of Eastern Europe. The Tatars formed first, precise and confident, their banners rippling in the icy wind. Their archers, masters of mobility, prepared to rain death from distance. Across the field, Algirdas' troops stood silent and unmoving, their discipline as sharp as their steel. The Grand Duke arranged his men into 6 divisions, a formation later described as a sweeping crescent or forward-driving wedge. Heavy infantry filled the center, shields locked tight, while cavalry waited hidden among low ridges and winter-thin trees, ready to surge forward at the signal. The two armies faced each other in silence, the breath of men and horses misting in the cold air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun broke faintly through the clouds. For a heartbeat, time seemed to hold still. And then, as if the steppe itself had exhaled, history began to move again. Lithuania, once a border duchy on the edge of Europe, was about to challenge the empire that had ruled the continent's heart for a century. At Blue Waters, steel would decide whose name the steppe would remember and whose would fade into dust. At the signal, the Tatar ranks unleashed their fury. Arrows streaked through the sky like dark rain, a storm of iron whistling down upon the Lithuanian lines. The first barrage shattered against the shields. The second scattered harmlessly. The third found no weakness. For the first time, the Horde, the very force that had crushed kingdoms, met an enemy that refused to break. Realizing arrows would not win the day, Kutlabuga ordered the charge. The steppe thundered as the cavalry advanced, sabers flashing like lightning beneath the clouds. They slammed into the Lithuanian center with terrifying force. But instead of folding, the Lithuanian line absorbed the blow. Horses screamed, collapsing in the mud. Riders fell into chaos. Only then did Algirdas make his move. With a calm hand, he signaled the flanks. Lithuanian horsemen swept in from both sides, closing the trap like a predator's jaws. Panic rippled through the Tatar ranks. Trapped in close quarters, the famed riders of the Horde could no longer maneuver. In moments, the mighty formation dissolved into a desperate rout. The banners of the Golden Horde fell into the dirt, trampled by their own. The Golden Horde's long dominion over Ukraine had come to an end. Algirdas wasted no time. Podolia and its fortresses fell swiftly. The Mongol tax collectors expelled and Lithuanian garrisons raised in their place. Roads reopened, trade revived, and the southern frontier stood secure for the first time in generations. Between Kyiv and the Black Sea, the shadow of Mongol rule finally lifted. Yet Lithuania's conquest was unlike the brutal subjugations so common in medieval Europe. No faith was outlawed, no tongue forbidden, no temple burned. Local princes continued to govern under Lithuanian oversight. The Grand Duchy's guiding ideal, later recorded by chroniclers, was simple. We do not destroy the old, nor do we impose the new. This policy of tolerance gave Lithuania a unique reputation. Centuries later, some Ukrainian historians would call it the Silk Empire, not for its trade in silk, but for the soft strength with which it ruled. Orthodox life flourished. Cities like Kyiv breathed again, and for a brief moment, peace settled over the steppes. But medieval peace never lasts. Algirdas' triumph rested on a dangerous gamble. That Mamai, the most powerful general of the Golden Horde, would lose his civil war at Sarai. If Mamai fell, the Horde would crumble. Instead, fate favored him. Mamai returned victorious. When he learned that Algirdas had carved out his southern lands and replaced Mongol banners with Lithuanian ones, his rage was immediate. Yet even he knew the truth. The Horde was fractured and exhausted. Another campaign might destroy it entirely. Sensing this, Algirdas acted swiftly. He offered tribute, a gesture more symbolic than submissive. Mamai accepted. Pride gave way to pragmatism, and Lithuania's hold on its new frontier was sealed not by blood, but by strategy. Its armies patrolled the same plains once ruled by Mongol Khans. Its banners flew beside the Black Sea. For the first time, Lithuania was shaping the destiny of the East. Kyiv, once the heart of the old Rus, now thrived under new protection. The city's faith and culture survived intact, its scholars and merchants reconnecting with Byzantium and the West. The contrast with Moscow grew starker by the year. Where Moscow turned inward, tightening rule, building an empire of obedience, Lithuania looked outward, building bridges between worlds. One nation embraced diversity, the other centralized power. Those two paths would define Eastern Europe for centuries to come. Between 1368 and 1372, Algirdas even led campaigns deep into Russian lands, reaching the Kremlin walls themselves. Though he never took the city, the message was clear: the balance of power in the east had shifted. By 1371, Algirdas addressed the Patriarch of Constantinople as Basilius of Lithuania, claiming equality with emperors. A century earlier, few had even known the name of his people. Now, Lithuania stood among Europe's mightiest realms. The Battle of Blue Waters was more than a victory, it was a turning point. Under Lithuanian rule, the lands of Ukraine and Belarus began to forge their own identities, fusing Orthodox tradition with Western influence. In doing so, they became the bridge between two worlds. For Ukraine, especially, this era marked a rebirth. Where the Horde had enslaved, Lithuania liberated. Its rule brought not oppression, but revival. Yet history rarely remembers such victories. There are no grand epics of blue waters, no marble monuments, no sweeping films to retell its glory. Perhaps the chroniclers simply didn't see what it meant, that on that frozen steppe, Lithuania had done what no one else could: defeat empire with freedom. Today, the rivers still flow where the armies once clashed, cold, silent, and blue. Beneath them rests the memory of a single day when thunder rose from the north, and the steppe bowed before a new power.